Welcome one and all to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me as always is Phil McKenzie.
Oh,
that was great. Wow, very quick. Very, very quick, Phil. I can tell you're on the ball, and thank goodness, because Jesus Christ, do we have a lot of shit to cover this week. We knew it was going to be the case. But as good as the Jan Dvalishvili card looked on paper, I think it was even better in practice. An absolutely fantastic and very, very well-rounded night of fights. A little bit of everything, most of it violent, much of it stupid, some of it awesome, and a few really shocking surprises in there as well. We are definitely going to be talking about the main surprise, the main event, which sort of made all of our talk about, like, Petr Yan almost, we should have talked more about Merab Dvalishvili, given how that fight played out. So we're going to get to that later in today's episode. Before that, we have UFC 286 right around the corner with the rubber match. Well, it is a rubber match. That's right. I forgot. They were 1-1. I sort of in my head thought that Usman was 2-0. Between Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards. Edwards, of course, defending the title, which he took from Usman with a stupendous fifth-round head kick knockout in their second fight. Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev is in the co-main event slot. There's a lot of other good stuff on this card. Probably just those two are what we're going to have time to cover on the main episode. But in addition to, we got, Gunnar Nelson, Brian Barberena. We got Jennifer Maia, Casey O'Neill. I'm not sure how much I love that, but we got, actually, I've been liking Jennifer Maia lately. I think she's made some interesting strides with her boxing. We got Jack Shore versus Makwan Amirkhani. That'll be funny. I like Jack Shore, so I'm happy about that. Marvin Vettori, Roman Dolidze. In addition to all the stuff from last weekend's undercard. So we are definitely going to be doing another bonus episode, which, I hope you enjoyed last week's. You will get more of the same, more undercard slurry, sort of ground up and piped through a tube straight down your throat so we can make fight fan foie gras. But until then, let's talk about UFC 286. Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman, 3. And we kind of just jumped in here, Phil, because I don't know how much I have to add that hasn't already been discussed in the lead up to the second fight. I think the real question is, did we learn much from the second fight? Is that sort of result reproducible? Obviously it has to be in a purely statistical sense. It happened. If that result is not reproducible, is it not just a fight that Kamaru Usman wins? What has changed?
Firstly, I think it is worth looking at the fight as being one that Kamaru Usman was pretty much winning.
Yeah.
But I think we're in danger of overselling how dominant he was in the fight.
I agree. I just rewatched it, and the first 2 rounds in particular are very competitive, more than I remembered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Edwards pretty much probably wins the first round.
He definitely wins the first round, yes.
And he would have won even if he hadn't knocked Usman out, would have won the 5th round. So at most, we're talking, this was a 48, this would have been, without the KO, a 48-47 win for Usman.
Correct, yeah.
Which means that Edwards can win rounds and can, he's got the potential for winning a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as we have in the past sort of slightly underplayed the potential for the guy who looked like he was on the end of a losing dynamic to actually just not simply win through a single dynamic moment, but to actually just, win the fight.
Have we?
That was sort of
one.
what happened in Sterling Yarn 2, for example.
Okay, fine. There's one.
But yeah, I think the issue is really Edwards has too much of a tendency to concede space to Usman.
Yeah.
Too much of a tendency to put his back to the fence.
Yep.
And that Usman can simply, is always going to be able to pressure, get into the clinch, and where he's both stronger and basically, take down into mount aside in the first, better wrestler.
Yeah. And it was also the trend of the fight as well that made it feel. I mean, the much hay has been made deservedly of the pep talk that Leon Edwards' corner gave him. The pep talk is not even the right word for it. Pep talk sounds cute. Nothing cute was happening in that corner. It was screaming and just defiance. Really like a Rockhold Costa energy compressed into a 1 minute inter-round talk. Of just like, yeah, do not go quietly into that good night, Leon. Go out there and kill this motherfucker, or else you're a failure. Like really piling the stakes on the shoulders of a man who seemed already to be crumbling, and it did have an effect. I mean, I think even aside from the kick, there is a difference in the body language of Leon Edwards throughout the 5th round. He's out there trying, he has a determination in his eyes. Every moment of the fight up to that point, that was being sapped out of him. And that's why it still feels like such a dominant fight for Usman. Like, I'm still sort of the opinion that Usman kind of just coasted in the 5th.
Yeah.
I kind of just think he wasn't.
After the,
yeah. I said it then.
I've racked up enough. Like, I've racked up 3 guaranteed rounds.
Yeah. I don't think it was necessary.
This guy looks defeated.
Yes. I don't think it was necessarily an Edwards round because Edwards was out there taking it from Usman, even though he was a lot more active. And certainly in the minute preceding the head kick knockout was finding some really nice strikes and really trying to put his foot on the gas. Usman also really took his foot off the gas in that round. And who knows how durable that newfound inspiration and determination would have been otherwise. So yeah, let's get back to the dynamics you addressed. The big thing that really struck me this time, rewatching the fight, the main sort of functional problem for Leon here is his footwork more than anything. Like he's a guy who just chronically fights in spots. He's very much a turn-taking fighter. He's not as great a counterpuncher as you would like to think. All of these are issues we've addressed before. But really what strikes me is that his evasive footwork just isn't very good. That he takes a lot of steps straight backwards. He often, in this fight, did not start circling until his back had already hit the fence. And at that point, I think it's often too late. Too late for good pivots and stuff like that. Like once you let your stance collapse against the fence, you don't have room to pivot. It's not like a boxing ring where there's space under the ropes. There's an apron your foot can go onto beyond the perimeter of the fighting surface. The cage is a wall. So if both your heels hit it, you can't do good footwork anymore. And that, forces him into just sort of loping sideways along the fence. And it's just really, really easy for Usman to corral him or grab a hold of him or run him into a hook in that kind of situation. And it struck me that the way Leon Edwards gets off the fence in his fights is the clinch.
Yeah, that was really the narrative of the RDA fight, is that he was constantly getting put into the cage by RDA.
Yeah.
But once RDA pushed into the clinch, Edwards was, partially bigger, but also just a strong technical clinch fighter who would just control RDA and land strikes and then turn him off and move away.
Yeah, and this is a fundamental...
That wasn't what was happening when Usman was pushing him into the cage. I mean, again, like the 4th round, Edwards is doing well, like for half the round, like maybe more. But then as soon as his back's to the cage, it's just a free shot for Usman.
Yeah.
And then again, it's not actually like a super dominant round when it comes down to it for Usman. But just the fact that you can see the will being sapped out of Leon.
Right. Yeah, and that is the fundamental problem with him. Well, those are 2 root causes of his difficulty in this matchup. Is A, that he's too easy to put against the fence, where any movement, any evasive decisions he could make from there are already severely hampered by being against a wall. And then B, rather than so A, he would have to stop a short of the fence. He'd have to keep his stance. Your back heel touches, you go no further back. Your front foot does not move back. You can't retreat anymore. That needs to be a change. The other thing is, in that position, the sort of penultimate position before which you're just completely trapped and cornered, you have to strike. You have to put a jab in Usman's face, and that will allow you to either push him straight back and get off the fence, which is another way that Edwards gets out of the corner in his other fights, or to then pivot. Now you've given yourself enough space and a moment of time when you can pivot and actually escape. Otherwise, it seems so hardwired into him that when he gets cornered, the main decision he makes is wait for the opponent to come in. And then often, a lot of the clinches in this fight even were engaged by him. That he was backed up against the fence, but that's what he does. As you said, he's a strong clinch fighter. It works against basically everyone except Usman. So this still looks, as it did in the lead up to the second fight, like one where as long as Usman is pressuring as much as possible, it still looks like a downward trend for Edwards. It's just going to be more and more pressure. He's going to be having less fun. And a guy who likes space, who likes to sort of take turns, who likes to pick his spots and fight in bursts, just does not like the kind of fight that Usman is capable of pressing. So it still looks to me, despite the fact that, it's a way more competitive fight than it has been painted as, even by me. It doesn't look like a good fight for Leon Edwards.
Mm-hmm. I will say I think there's a stylistic window here, which in some ways I would hope Usman doesn't fall into. I do like Leon as a fighter, but I don't want to see Usman losing a fight because he fought badly.
Right.
If you know what I mean. But I think I'm cribbing from Ryan Wagner here. But he basically, I think, said that he didn't really think that Usman showed much better pressure in this fight than he normally does. It was simply that Edwards was conceding space to him, and so that it arrived there by default.
I agree.
And that does mean that the dynamics of the fight are perhaps, if this was insistent pressure Usman of their first fight, or indeed most of his other earlier career, you might be thinking, it might be just like this probably isn't that winnable for Edwards because he's constantly under pressure, he's going to gas out faster, and so on and so forth. But still, the sort of mid-range kickboxer that we've largely seen, it won't take that much for Leon to stay off the cage, and indeed it didn't in the fifth round. It doesn't take much either more in terms of more assertiveness from Edwards or just more timidity from Usman.
Yeah, it just takes an assertive
change the dynamic.
That last minute of the fight, it's just like a more assertive posture from Edwards. Like it just comes through the body language. Like, I am not stepping back the moment you threaten something. I'm keeping my stance. You have to make me back up by hitting me. That's really all it takes. And in this position, I'm feinting. I'm creating threats, and I'm working off of those threats. That's what he does in that last minute. The problem is it's a small change to make Edwards, in some ways, like a bad stylistic matchup. He could be a bad stylistic matchup for Usman, because he's a great defensive wrestler. He's a very quick and powerful striker. He absolutely could really trouble Usman. The problem is it's also a huge change to make, just because of who Leon is. It's one
that we haven't seen ever.
It's a small change mechanically and strategically, but it's a huge change psychologically. And this is why I've always found, or for a long time, found Leon so frustrating. I don't know. Leon Edwards is not a guy who ever looks like he's having a particularly good time in a fight.
No.
He just looks like he's just stressing, and he's too reactive. He just isn't comfortable holding on to an initiative.
Yeah. I mean, so the things you can ask him to do in this fight are not, they're not complicated. It's just stay in the middle of the cage. The more you worked your low kicks, the more Usman started to reach for them. We said that before the first fight, that he should probably work his low kicks, at least partially because Usman has no knees. Usman is not really much of a shot wrestler anymore, and really wasn't that much when he was earlier, starting out. But as he's aged out and become more of an upright kickboxer, clinch guy, and
he will still hit
he's preserving his knees.
He'll still hit some nasty shots, as he did in the second fight, once Leon is against the fence.
Yeah, the level change, but he won't shoot in open space much.
Yeah,
so kicks mostly are there. Mm-hmm. I think the risk is more that Usman is going to counter them with punches and his own kicks, but Leon should definitely do that, partially because that's who Usman is now. But it's just the question is, can you find yourself trusting Leon Edwards to do that? Yeah. Can you trust Leon Edwards to walk into fire in that kind of way in anything but spurts? And almost everything about Leon Edwards' career up to this point just says, no, you can't.
Yeah.
He can't do it against layups like old Cerrone and Diaz.
Yep.
And he can't do it against, he can't do it against Usman with any consistency. So, unless he finds another miracle finish, or unless Usman suddenly looks old, which again is entirely possible.
Sure.
He is pretty old at this point and has had has documented physical problems and is had a very, very physical style. You kind of have to pick Kamaru Usman, I think.
I think you just have to. Yeah. Even that amazing fifth round is still categorically a burst from Leon Edwards. It's a minute-long burst of desperate activity, and even by that, by that standard, I've seen more aggressive fighters in desperate moments than that.
It wasn't Davy Grant.
Exactly.
Let's say that.
He wasn't going for it. If Usman had met him and been firing back, again, who is to say that he would not have just broken again? He mustered the will to go for it, and Usman kind of let him. And I really don't want to take credit away from Leon for pulling it off and for staying mentally there, even after being sort of frustrated and giving up on himself, obviously, at several points in the fight, being able to come back from that brink. Clearly the man has some incredible mental fortitude, but the fight is still more or less defined by his inability to fight in anything other than short bursts. And otherwise, to be too passive, too defensive, too reactive, and essentially invite a guy like Usman to pressure. And if I'm Usman and his team, we're coming in with pressuring being 100% the game plan the whole time.
Yeah, I mean that's all that they really need to remember to take from that. Yeah.
Just
from the
stay
fight
on him.
Is you just never should have let him off the hook.
Exactly. Stay on him the whole time. Those sequences of punches up against the fence, into the takedowns, mauling in the clinch, doesn't have to be pretty. You just stay on him the whole time, and he's not going to find those moments, and he's going to be more and more miserable as the fight goes on.
Yep. Work the body more when he's up against the cage because he's not really going to fire back unless he grabs the clinch. And if he does, you'll have underhooks and you'll be able to push him back into the cage.
Yeah.
It's just do what you were doing for the 4 rounds of the last fight and just keep doing it through the 5th.
Yeah. For both of them.
Just do it more.
For both of them, the necessary adjustment seems to be relatively straightforward and simple. But for Leon, it seems against his character. It seems very out of type for him to stick to that adjustment. And for Usman, it is something we have seen him do before. And something we saw him do at points in this fight, even if, as Ryan Wagner said, which again, I kind of agree with, that largely he was only pressuring when Edwards was basically begging him to. But he doesn't have to do that. Just stay on him if you're Kamaru Usman. So we will see how long-lived the Leon Edwards title reign may be. An incredible moment, but I think we're both coming down on the side of probably pretty difficult to reproduce.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, the co-main event of UFC 286, a lightweight fight between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Well, Phil, as we started the first segment with a sort of thematic question for that fight, I think we can start this one with another sort of broad question that ties into a link to the last fight. And that question is, has Trevor Whitman ruined two of his greatest and most aggressive fighters' ability to pressure? Because we're talking about Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev, and it really seems like it would be a good idea for Justin Gaethje to do the whole pressure and low kicks kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a minute. It has honestly been a minute since we have seen him insist on that.
Yeah. It feels like it's been a minute since we've seen Justin Gaethje look like good.
Yeah.
I feel like, you have to kind of go back to the Ferguson fight. Like there was a stretch. I think the Ferguson to the Barboza fight. I mean, admittedly, these were all varying shades of shot.
Yeah.
But in terms of mixing up his control with his wild flailing violence,
I think the Barboza fight was the last classic Gaethje fight.
What do we mean by classic Gaethje fight?
Gaethje really, really wanting to come forward and just meet his opponent's offense with offense off the front foot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He has been counterpunching and evading, and he's often been shockingly good at it, but it also feels like the more we see of it, the more he's sort of lacking the necessary, interstitial skills to, remain safe. He can pretend to be slick, but he's not slick, He's not out here keeping people at bay with the jab. He's not countering with jabs. You have strapped the Justin Gaethje toolkit onto a different kind of vehicle. But it's sort of like he's become like a technical, you take a shitty Toyota pickup truck and you strap an anti-tank gun to it. And then it fires once and it flips over because the gun is too big for the shitty Toyota. That's sort of what Gaethje feels like in half of these recent fights.
Yeah, because he does have defense now, which he didn't, back in his WSOF days.
Mm-hmm.
He can slip and roll shots. He can, as well as being able to do his old, catch and pitch counter thing.
Yep.
He's got an idea of both cagecraft and where he should be. He's got an idea of where he should be in the cage, and he will, move to control it in one way or another. But it's the fact that, like, yeah, I mean, I think the idea of like bolting the cannon onto the roof is a good one, because it's the fact that he will slip and roll and then throw the biggest, hardest punch you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And then almost fall over.
The weaponry does not match the sort of subtlety that the vehicle's going for. It's that Charles Oliveira fight I found particularly damning. I thought that was frankly just a bad showing from Justin Gaethje. And
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, both that and the Gaethje fight, the Khabib fight, did make me wonder, how much of this is this particular run, how much of it is him being scared of takedowns?
Well,
how much of it is him thinking, I have to throw, paradoxically thinking, I have to throw absolutely everything into these punches.
Yeah.
Because this person's going to take me down otherwise.
Yeah.
I need to finish him or deter him with this big punch. Otherwise, he's going to, which is obviously stupid.
Because but it is a classic MMA overcorrection.
Yeah.
We're used to thinking of
obviously if you don't put everything into your strikes, then you won't fall over.
Yeah. We're used to thinking of the classic MMA overcorrection in like a fight-to-fight career spanning mode. In trying to make stylistic changes. This is also an enduring aspect of MMA in a tactical mode. Where like the old saw of Boss Rutan saying that the jab is fake, basically.
Yes.
The jab doesn't work because you can walk through it. It doesn't knock you out instantly. You and I have talked about this many times, that a lot of fighters do seem to gamble, take massive gambits thinking, like if I'm going to be in there, it's going to be so dangerous that I should take an incredibly reckless decision. And that does feel like it. I mean, certainly an aspect of the Oliveira fight that I find just baffling is, how terrified, the fact that there's a point where Charles Oliveira, there's 2 points where he just falls down, one of which is not even a knockdown. He gets hurt and then just decides to fall down. And Gaethje will not follow up. And then there's a point where Charles Oliveira pulls guard and Gaethje, there's no other term for it. He runs scared out of the guard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, ooh, I can't be on top of a guy in an MMA fight. I don't have massively heavy hands or anything. That seems very uncharacteristic compared to the Justin Gaethje we came to know in his early days. But
and also, we've mentioned the wacky ice flailing performance against Khabib as well.
One of the greatest bad fights of all time.
just incredible. Like, it just needs, instead of a ref, it just needs someone there with a slide whistle. So I mean, there is reason to hope that you might see a less completely insane Justin Gaethje than we saw against the three grapplers that he's been fighting against recently.
Yeah. Fiziev.
But that is a separate question from things like his directionality, because Fiziev is almost certainly going to win and possibly finish, depending on how Gaethje's doing. He's almost certainly going to win the first round and hurt Justin Gaethje very badly.
Yeah, at his fastest, his most dynamic. He's going to land a shitload of kicks. He's going to put together some 5-punch combinations that just, Gaethje can't deal with the speed at first.
Yeah, and we've said Fiziev he's a very good defensive fighter.
Yeah.
He's pretty good at defending kicks. He's just really fast.
A very aggressive defensive fighter too.
Yeah.
Fiziev doesn't waste a lot of slips.
No. And I think the issue is that Gaethje's range weapons are traditionally, there's the low kicks to work into range, and he can low kick his counters and so on. And I don't think this is going to work that well early against Kamaru Usman.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just pretty good at defending and the striking. But obviously it's the fact that we've also seen Fiziev kind of gas out against Bobby Green and Mark Chikadze, for that matter, in fights which were actually like not like one-way traffic, but obviously like he was clearly winning them for 2 rounds.
Yeah, well, and the RDA fight was slipping away from him a bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
He pulled it out. It was good to see his defensive wrestling, which was really on point, and also his ability to like hang tough and find a second wind and still look for his opportunities. But it definitely was not a fight where he was as active or successful in rounds 3 and 4 as he was in round 1.
Yep.
So I think that's a pretty reliable arc for Fiziev's fights.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, unless he is, unless he was one of the biggest athletic cheaters we'd ever seen, no one would be able to maintain that sort of level of explosiveness.
He'd have to be Merab Dvalishvili.
Indeed, yeah. He'd have to be Merab or Yair or something like that.
Yeah,
just
another good one, yeah.
Some absolute like top level mutant, and he's not quite that.
No.
But yeah, I mean, there's the other issues is that he's still he's not a long straight puncher. He will have to get into the pocket with Gaethje.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a significant chance Gaethje might be able to beat him up a bit on exits.
Mm-hmm.
But he's just got very, very fast hands. It's the fact that it's also the way that Fiziev is not. I think he's going to be outpowered in the kicking department. He tends to kick with his feet. He doesn't sort of land with the shin as much as Gaethje will.
Mm-hmm.
And he prioritizes sort of speed rather than power with his kicks. But again, like it's hard to see that mattering over like 2 rounds.
Yeah.
Over the first 2 rounds anyway. But once we get into that 3rd round, it starts to become obviously much more of a difficult question to ask.
Yeah. And I think for that reason, a lot of how this fight will play out, I think it's good for Fiziev that it's only 3 rounds.
Oh yeah.
Because Gaethje, we know, will also gas, but not that much changes. If anything, Gaethje gassing at this point might make him more of the classic Gaethje he kind of would need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Just like forget all the shit you've learned and all the new cool stuff you're trying to do and just go out there and fight the dude. I think an important fight to look at, given that this is a 3-rounder, is Gaethje Alvarez. Which is a fight where Gaethje had nothing going in the 3rd round, other than the fact that Eddie Alvarez was crippled from low kicks. But Gaethje was completely gassed and just waiting to be knocked out. Like one of the, you want to talk about fights on ice skates. The 3rd round of Alvarez Gaethje, that is Gaethje at his most falling downest you'll ever see. Like just running at Alvarez, like walking like a baby. You know how when a baby takes their first steps and they figure out that what walking really is just sort of falling and catching yourself? That's really what his forward advances look like in the 3rd round of that Alvarez fight. And this is because Alvarez crushed him with body shots. He put a huge emphasis on working the body early. And for all of the new defensive abilities he's gained, Gaethje doesn't know how to stop body shots.
No.
You know, the most he can do is, shell up and hunker down and hope that it sort of catches off the guard. But Fiziev's a good body puncher, a good body kicker. I think if he's smart, he will do the same thing. And whatever sort of directionality the fight has, just put as much money in the bank as possible. Front kicks, round kicks, uppercuts, straight shots, hit the body constantly.
Yeah, I mean that is really. I mean, the thing is that Fiziev, I mean, apart from anything else, he just seems to be coming into his own. I mean, even for someone who has issues with their gas tank, to fight RDA, who, whatever else he's been later on in his career, is still obviously remarkably well conditioned.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
And still look, like he's fading a bit, but be broadly fine within round 4.
Yep.
And you basically balance that against Justin Gaethje, who has looked absolutely exhausted in the wars that he's been in, and has had to drag people, in the fights where he hasn't dusted people almost immediately. has had to drag people into horrific wars, which he hasn't actually often won.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically like it's like he broke Michael Johnson down the stretch.
Yep. No one's ever done that though.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he does win them, it's like a drowning man killing the lifeguard.
Yeah. Or Michael Chandler. And these guys are not RDA.
Exactly, yeah. And
many positive attributes, but one of their negative ones definitely include exploding after the first 2 rounds. I mean,
exactly, yeah. Just bolts and spare parts just flying off with every action they take. And I mean, I do look at something like the Chandler fight, which I think is the most recent decent showing from Gaethje. I think he looked pretty sharp in that fight. He ran into some trouble, but it's a pretty smart performance, given that Chandler, I think, was sort of tailor-made to lose to him down the stretch.
Yeah.
But I do look at some of those exchanges and think there is a chance for just utter chaos to break out, right? Whatever happens, Fiziev is going to step in and not be quite as powerful as Justin Gaethje, and he is going to be in range to trade punches with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, they're more overwhelming combinations than Chandler's because, they're combinations. But Fiziev is pretty tricky to keep track of in those kinds of exchanges. He's really, really good at consistently putting his shots together. But as you said, he is going to have to get into middle or even close distance to land shots. And Gaethje can be super accurate and super dangerous on the counter in that range. In fact, I think the more hilarious overswinging is not only a result of his obvious fear of the ground game, but also the fact that Oliveira is huge. And he was having to reach for him. Fiziev, as long as he's not just at kicking range, once he gets into punch, Gaethje's not going to have to overswing to hit him. Even if he does overswing, there's going to be a greater chance of him catching a guard or something and literally staying on balance just because he's actually run into something that helps him correct. So I still think, I think it would be smart for Fiziev to try to keep this a neutral range fight and really, really work his kicking game.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be scary for him in the pocket, but I still favor him to be durable enough and tricky enough with his combination punching to catch Gaethje, and I just think he has to stay on the body in whatever range he's in to make sure that Gaethje cannot capitalize on what seems to be a pretty predictable downward shift in the third round of a fight for Fiziev.
Also, if Fiziev can get into the pocket without being countered on his first shot, it has been a fairly consistent way of getting to Gaethje, is that once he's stuck in a combination, he's not throwing back again.
That's true.
You can just keep combination punching him, and he's just going to back away until he's or shell up until he's sort of convinced that it's over.
Yep. Yeah.
I think bursts of activity from Fiziev. Again, I think just his ability to just evade punches and block and counter kicks at range. Just the fact that Gaethje has been vulnerable to combination punching. I don't even, as I said, I don't really even trust Gaethje to outlast him.
No,
he's been riding such a ragged edge.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, in some ways, it's almost like Gaethje is a much better Alexander Hernandez.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that at that moment.
You can draw the counter, right, and then it's the re-counters that really overwhelm him. Dustin Poirier had tons of success doing that against him. So did Eddie Alvarez. Lots of people have, and Fiziev can definitely do that. Just sort of draw the big counter swing, and then take an angle, take a half step back, and then just dive back in with 4 punches and send the last one to the body, because Gaethje's going to be covering up for that entire salvo, and you're going to hit the one to the body even if nothing else lands.
Yep. And I mean, the other thing is Fiziev just seems like a really smart guy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. He's a striking coach. Does seem like a genuine student of the game. So I think he will have things prepared for Gaethje. But yeah, it should be. I mean, it's a fantastic booking.
Oh my God.
Say what you like about Gaethje, but he has been guaranteed 100% entertainment his entire career, and frankly, pretty much so is Fiziev.
Absolutely, yeah, both extremely entertaining fighters. I'm just glad to see Fiziev finally breaking into the top echelon of lightweights.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see one of the sort of people knocking on the doors actually getting a chance to have the door open to them.
Yeah, he fits right in. Like you said, he's just as action-packed and just as violent and, in many ways, more technical and creative and thoughtful than many of the other top lightweight violence kings. So he fits in perfectly. And I find myself feeling reasonably confident that he's going to win this one.
Yeah, same.
All right. Well, we'll see. We were reasonably confident about something else, which we're going to talk about in our next segment. Last weekend, Petr Yan took on Merab Dvalishvili, who probably had Aljamain Sterling feeling a little uncomfortable about how meager his own efforts were in beating Yan in their rematch while he was sitting cage side. So we're going to talk about Dvalishvili Yan after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands. As promised, last weekend's main event, Redux. By the way, now seems like a good time to mention, Phil, that some people were mad that we didn't eat enough crow about being wrong about John Jones. How do you feel about that?
I don't know. It's just like Cyril Gahn looked super bad.
Yeah.
I don't really know what else to say.
We didn't eat enough crow, Phil. We said we were wrong.
Do they want us to say that John Jones is better? Because we actually talked about how good he was.
We kind of did. I kind of thought.
Or do they want us to? I mean, because we also talked about how bad Cyril Gahn looked.
Well, you can't. I guess we can't mention that. I don't know.
Maybe we should just. I just don't know.
We said we were wrong. We were and actually, this is a good reminder of how good John Jones is. By the way, Cyril Gahn looked like shit. I don't know.
I mean, all we can be is honest.
Yeah, get used to it, folks. We were wrong again. And here we go. Eating, I think, a modest and acceptable amount of crow for Petr Yan's utter, complete, total defeat at the hands of Merab Dvalishvili. A loss which had even me sort of feeling bad for Petr Yan. Who I don't think of as a man, I was just, all his attitude at the weigh-ins and stuff, it sort of struck me I think Petr Yan is just kind of a dickhead.
Yeah.
I don't think he's
100%. I've pretty much always thought that about him. Haven't we all thought that about him forever?
Yeah, I don't know that I really ever paid much attention to him outside the cage, but certainly that was a growing feeling of the way he handled the Aljamain Sterling debacle, that was in his mind, completely Aljo's fault for getting fouled. But he's just kind of a piece of shit. I just don't think he's a very nice guy. I don't think he has a lot of empathy for other people at all. And even so, having acknowledged this and thought about it right at the start of the fight, by the end, I proved my own humanity by being oh, poor little guy. That looked like a terrible experience to have to go through. Anyway, we thought Petr Yan would win, even if he was a pretty unimaginative version of himself. Turns out he would have needed to be a much, much better version of himself to even compete, because he really did not compete. He was crushed by Merab Dvalishvili, who, is just a special athlete with truly one of the most unbelievable gas tanks ever. Like, no question. I want to see what the official numbers are because they were throwing a bunch of them around. Yeah, officially now, UFC Stats credits him with 49 takedown attempts in this fight. 49 takedown attempts.
Mind-blowing.
And not only that, like, let's see, 49 takedown attempts. How many were in the first round? 8. 12 in round 5. Significant strikes. He attempted 62 in round 1, 75 in round 5. So not only are these numbers incredible, the pace was insanely consistent. I have never seen somebody able to use their gas tank as a weapon the way Merab Dvalishvili did in this fight. And Petr Yan could not deal with it at all.
No, I mean, it was, as you said, it's one of the most impressive pace performances. I mean, I think it is the most impressive pace performance I've ever seen in MMA.
Somebody laughed saying like, "Oh, he lost to little Colby Covington." And it's like, I get what you're saying because they're both pace fighters, but Colby Covington couldn't do shit like this.
Yeah,
that was pace as a weapon defined. This will define that whole idea of just drowning somebody with pace and output and intensity, because he did it nonstop, even ramping up at the end for 25 minutes straight.
Yeah. And like the most incredible thing is, it was pace as a weapon. And it was the fact that it wasn't even like that successful, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like it was that the takedowns weren't leading to any control.
Yeah.
He was missing tons of his strikes. All this kind of stuff that would gas you out. Like as a purely defensive performance, statistically, Petr Yan probably did pretty damn well.
Yeah.
But it just didn't matter.
There were only 11 of those 49 takedowns succeeded.
Yeah, and barely any of those for any control time.
Yeah. In total, he's credited with less than 7 minutes of control time, a lot of which was against the cage later in the fight. Very little of that was actually on the ground. Very little.
And very little bit did he land any meaningful offense from those control positions either.
Mm-hmm. It was just making Petr Yan deal with it nonstop.
Yeah. So, I mean, it did remind me in a way of Colby Covington, because I remember, friend of the show, Dan Albert had wrote a good Twitter thread about, some of Jan's techniques and weaknesses. And,
yeah, he did.
And compared him to Robbie Lawler. And, yeah, I mean, this reminded me of fights like Lawler-Covington. Where Robbie Lawler is looking to figure out his opponent, and they simply fight at this constant high pitch, this dentist drill of volume that just means he just can't ever get his head in the game.
Yep.
And yeah, this reminded me of that completely, but it's just the pitch of the drill was one I honestly couldn't have imagined.
Yeah.
It was the fact that, we've seen people shock Yan early, like Sterling, had success early in both their first fights.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going after him, and Yan was like, oh yeah, let's see what this guy has. And it's not necessarily starting slow or anything, but he's just, I'm going to figure him out. And Sterling just does a bunch of wild shit, and he starts tagging Yan up in both of their fights.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Merab just did that. He just hit Sterling, the pace that Sterling hit, which completely exhausted Sterling by midway through both of those fights.
Yeah.
And then he just kept it. He just kept it at exactly the same level, just maintained it, and that was it. Yan was just losing to it was giving up every fifth takedown and getting hit by every third punch, and that just translated to crushing dominance.
Yeah. And much like some of Lawler's worst performances, it is again, I understand the Colby Covington comparison. They're in the same category of fighter for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the constant double threat thing too, just taken to the nth degree. We see this so often in MMA and somehow we still underestimate its effect. How do you get your striking going if you always have to worry about the takedowns? Well, in this fight, he literally always had to worry about the takedowns. And to his credit, as you said, Petr Yan dealt with the takedowns incredibly well. Like, the man is a phenomenal wrestler. He wasn't really out-wrestled in this fight. It was just the ability to constantly change between different threats, different ranges, different phases, without even really connecting them all that well until the very end. But just having those switch-ups in his back pocket and not fearing at all that he was not going to be able to keep using them for 25 minutes. I don't know. I don't know how anybody deals with that. Like, you have to be, I guess this is why the Jose Aldo fight sucked so much, because Jose could just defend the takedowns and then, like, nothing else was happening. But like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, Jose, I mean, the problem with the Jose fight was that Jose, yes, he could avoid the takedowns and then, and also the strikes. So it was just him getting held up against the cage.
Yeah, just nothing happened. Yan could not deal with the complete and varied threats at that pace. And frankly, I think there should have been a 10-8 round in there. I thought the fourth round, I thought was a shellacking from Dvalishvili. He was just beating him up on the feet by that point. Yeah.
I mean, apart from anything else, it just destroyed Jan's sense of range.
Yeah.
Because he just didn't know what distance he should be at and when he was in range to strike. I mean, so much of it was the most, the most classic MMA change-up ever.
Really? Yeah.
Dart in right hand or dart in double leg or, occasionally like a knee tap or whatever. But,
frequently it was a single as the fight went on because we haven't even mentioned that Dvalishvili pretty early hurt Petr Yan's leg.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other part. That was the other part of the change-up, is that he just started, when Yan was bracing himself for the takedown, Merab just started throwing in low kicks. I mean, and just nothing worked for him. It was, when he got his own takedowns, he got one which Merab immediately reversed, which looked incredibly demoralizing. And then he had another one where Merab just scrambled out of it. So, I mean, I think in an all-time sort of, would Merab beat every bantamweight in the world kind of that we've ever seen kind of thing? Probably not. I don't know if he would beat like TJ Dillashaw or Dominic Cruz, because they would take him down when he came rushing forward.
Yeah.
And, they would find ways to, they would have ways to, to keep him under control, essentially. I mean, in a weird way, he might even struggle with prime Rafael Assunção, because Assunção would, again, be able to take him down and be able to counterpunch him. But yeah, I mean, it was just the fact that Merab kept that gear at that pace that meant that you could tell, Yan just wasn't able to think.
No.
He just wasn't able to figure out what he was doing.
Yeah, he mustered a couple of rallies, in round 2, sort of midway through, that was when he was supposed to be hitting his adjustment phase. And you could see he timed a Merab jab and slipped and landed a really nice straight left. And then he's like, okay, what next? And then Merab just runs in and double legs him. And it just works, because now that he's finally zoned in on what the striking openings are, his takedown defense immediately suffers. And then he has to go back to thinking about that. And then he becomes more defensive and shelling up, and then Merab is kicking him. And then round 3, he was trying to throw short, straight counter shots, at really close range. Just because Merab was constantly crashing in. And then, Merab was also, as the fight went on, able to kind of just outstrike him from range too. He was just jabbing him and kicking him and landing body shots and using the threat of the jab to land left hooks upstairs. I don't know, man. I
think, just in general, just Merab is just thrilled to have someone thinking about what he's doing to
Absolutely.
Them. He just doesn't, he just loves it. He doesn't get tired of doing it.
Yeah, he's like a work dog. we just watched a man like who would just spend 20 hours a day herding sheep, like chasing them. Oh, they're responding to every move I make. Like, it makes it look effortless because he's literally just having a blast. It's a game for Merab. To have an opponent who is just trying to counter everything that he's doing.
To beat Merab, I think you have to come forward. You have to meet him and control him in some way, which is frankly a terrifying proposition.
Yeah, it can't be done.
It also did make me think like how much we sometimes underrate the dynamics of like great camps, because both the like Khabib Islam and Merab Aljo bromances, I think, are these fights where are these, you see these performances from these guys where you realize, oh yeah, the first guy's super good. And then, the more you see over time, the more you realize the first guy is really good, at least partially because he's training with the second guy who is also really good.
Yeah.
Like, there is some fantastic, there is and was some fantastic synergy going on in those camps.
And I think something else that has to be pointed out, that the coaches deserve a lot of credit in both these cases as well. Like, it's not just, we have seen many camps who have an iron sharpens iron sort of thing going on. It's not just having training alongside other great fighters. In fact, I think you look at like Alexander Volkanovski, and he has a bit of that because he brings in great fighters and great specialized athletes to work with, but it's really just that his team is really good.
Yeah.
And I think you get that with, certainly with Khabib and Islam, when, what was Khabib's father's name? Abubakar? No, I'm embarrassing myself.
Oh God, now you've driven it out of my mind.
Yeah, we'll find it. But both with Khabib's father and now it seems to have, Abdulmanap, thank you. Seems to have left behind a pretty good architecture for like fight preparation. I think Khabib is still involved with Islam in particular and learned a lot of that from his father. So sort of the philosophy of that camp continues. And Serra Longo have for a very long time been a really good strategic camp. That they are really good at like sussing out what an opponent's weaknesses are, and their fighters tend to look very different from each other. Aljo and Merab have some things in common. They're not really similar fighters. Neither of them is all that similar to Chris Weidman. I mean, all these guys are great wrestler grapplers, but other than that, their styles vary widely from one man to the next. But they have all put in great performances by being super disciplined and sticking to really well-tailored game plans throughout their careers. And, I think Serra Longo now, in terms of like pure camp strategy, is like what Greg Jackson's team used to be. Like, that's the camp with the most consistent results for just, here's a person who has a sort of core tenets of their style, but they are making small adjustments and changing the way they use that style depending on who they're fighting, and they get great wins.
Yeah. Also, I find it just very pleasing that, like, back in the day, the genius of the fight, one of the geniuses of the fight game was, Greg Jackson. He's a soft-spoken sort of guru, not a guru type thing. Not a fraud, but he's got his martial arts that he practices or whatever, and nowadays it's like, who are some of the great tactical thinkers in the game?
Kick his fucking ass! It's some loud fucking Long
Put
Island.
your fucking hole in his chest.
Yeah, it is great. You could almost, because Greg Jackson, a brilliant coach. Like, for all the, here's the thing, Dwayne Ludwig gives strong charlatan vibes as well. Like, as much as the whole peanut butter or almond butter situation reflected pretty badly on Uriah, it's also like, Dwayne's like a world-class MMA coach. He's trying to sell branded almond butter in the gym. Like, Jesus Christ. very much a McDojo charlatan vibe, but is clearly, his results speak for themselves, a great striking coach and a great MMA coach. And you could almost believe in the Greg Jackson era, in his peak of success and recognition, that like the guru-ness was an essential part of like being good at preparing fighters.
Yeah, they bought it.
You're injecting some like mystique into this dumb meathead sport. That is really perfect.
It's headology.
Yeah, it's it's really perfect that you have just two just like sweaty meatball men just screaming and being rude and abrasive, and they are just as brilliant at preparing their fighters for a wide variety of opponents as Greg Jackson was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, the training partner dynamic is great, but also the coaches need some credit there. Merab knew exactly what he needed to do. This is not always how Merab fights. I mean, it sort of raises the question, should this be how he always fights? Because again, it's difficult to picture a lot of people being able to deal with this. But,
no. But I'm very excited to watch people try.
Yeah, right.
You can put him up against any elite bantamweight, and I will watch any, bunch of people who are mostly the remnants of the salty Jan Brigade might be like, that was boring, but no, it wasn't.
No,
it was one of the most one of the most impressive, like purely impressive performances I've seen.
Yeah,
like ever.
It was as completely dominant as something like Whitaker Gastelum, but with just like full pedal to the metal intensity, like all the little tactical tricks and subtleties of technique and feinting and changing timing that Robert Whitaker used. Now, we're making tactical errors nonstop. We're like swatting awkwardly at punches coming at us, and we're putting ourselves out of position, and we're failing on most of our takedowns, and it does not matter because the broad strokes can and did win the fight.
Mm-hmm. And and then this was the fight where, and I did feel sorry for Jan by the end of it, because I was like, come on, not like this.
Yeah.
Win a round.
Yeah. Not even close to one round.
Yeah. I mean, this was the fight where, the Jan stands just ran out of qualifiers, you know? I mean, he's now, he lost to Sterling the first time, and it was like, well, he lost, but. And then he lost the second time, and he was like, well, he lost, but. And then, he lost to O'Malley, and he was like, he lost, but.
He didn't really lose, but also technically, but.
Every time the qualifications have gotten, like, narrower.
Yeah.
It's been like, he lost the second Aljo. The first fight, he threw it away. The second fight, he was winning by the end. Then the O'Malley fight, it was like, well, he did have a lot of control. Mm-hmm. He wasn't winning by the end. And then this fight, it's just like, this was just an ass kicking.
And if we were talking about Petr Yan's mental state before, I mean, how is he going to respond to this? I mean, what does it do to you to have to go through and experience? It looked miserable. One of the most demoralizing things I can imagine going through, and then be expected to compete again. I will be very, very curious when Petr Yan gets scheduled another fight. I mean, again, I don't think anybody else can replicate what Merab did to him. But still.
No. But, I mean, there are zero stylistic commonalities between Jan and Sean O'Malley.
Correct. Yeah.
The two last people that he's lost to. And that's one of the reasons why I was kind of sad to see it happen to Jan, because he was such a phenomenal talent. He looked so great. He's still an enigma to me in some ways. Mm-hmm. I'm still really don't know where it went wrong. I mean, it's, you can say things about, like, his tendency to wait for opponents and try and figure them out and so on. But, there's guys like Aldo and so on who have made that work.
Yeah.
I still find it really difficult to really pin down where it's all gone wrong for Petr Yan. Like, he's more aggressive than Aldo. He attacks his own takedowns more. He's a body puncher. He's he's still just an absolute enigma as to how it's all fallen apart this badly, but it really has.
Yeah. Mookie Alexander was saying maybe like a big issue for him that sets him apart from someone like Aldo is that he's not that fast. I mean,
I used to say this, I think I might have just been kind of wrong. He is pretty fast.
I think he's pretty fast. I think he's. I don't know. Like, maybe there's small gradations to this. Like, but yeah, I don't know that it is that easy to explain. Honestly, why?
Yeah, it's one of the few things. You can look back at a lot of people and you can just be like, oh yeah. Once John Jones started struggling, you could just be like, yeah, well, sure, of course, he was always kind of a dogshit boxer. And like with Jan, you're just like, he's a fantastic defensive wrestler. He's a fantastic scrambler. He's iron-chinned. He's great cardio.
It's hard as hell.
Work. He's got good defense. Like, you're just like, and yeah, here we are. He's lost 4 of his last 5.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I do think Dan Albert was on point in saying that, like, yeah, a fundamental problem for Jan is essentially letting opponents dictate what kind of fight he's going to have.
Yeah, I mean, but normally it's the fact that he lets them start dictating it,
right?
And then he, gradually he turns it around on them. But yeah, this was just a fight where Merab just started doing that, and then just absolutely held that position open with just brute physicality for the entire time.
Yeah. If you want to talk about the age-old battle on this show, and from my mouth in particular, between tactics and strategy, Jan is a great tactical fighter.
One of the best.
And tactics lost this day. Not that Merab wasn't using sort of tactical elements of his own, but it was, again, really just the broad strokes of a relentless strategy that he did not deviate from at any moment. And, there's just no way to concede the strategic side of the fight and then solve tactically, from that situation. There's just no way out.
Yeah.
No way out for Jan.
And yeah, he's just gonna get matched up with another really good, really dangerous fighter after this.
Yeah, who do you think it might be? I mean, that's an interesting one to think about. Be funny if they gave him
the best he could hope for. The best he could hope for is Rob Font, to be honest. Rob Font or Pedro Munoz.
Munoz, Font.
The worst case. What's that?
Munoz, Font. I was also thinking that they might very cruelly make Cody Garbrandt fight him now that Garbrandt's back in the win column. And Jan has lost 2 in a row and is on a clear decline in terms of like ranking stature. That would be a funny.
Jan's still top 5.
He's got to be, he's got to be. But yeah, like this is a pretty precipitous fall from being the consensus #1 bantamweight in the world, even when he didn't hold the belt.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on directionality, where they're both going, and I think he should fight Ricky Simone when he comes back.
Oh no. Ricky Simone might be able to do what Merab did.
I know.
That's terrible.
Exactly. You're just like, he's a very similar style matchup. But, that's what you get for fighting in the best division.
Yeah, he went tooth and nail with Merab in a Merab fight. Ricky Simone. a worse version of Ricky Simone, and finished him.
Much worse, but I would say that in many ways, Ricky Simone has improved much more than Dvalishvili has since that fight.
Yeah, that would be brutal matchmaking. Brutal. I would consider it forgiving if they gave him Rob Font, because he could.
Yeah,
he could go in there.
And Pedro Munoz, those are fights where it's like, you better win these.
Right. Yeah, you should be able to go in there and do what old Jose did to Rob Font. The exact same thing. Like, it should be a more fragile, less dangerous Sean O'Malley, and you should be able to clean his clock at some point. But at this point, it's a serious question. I mean, even more so than it was before this. Like, how can a man possibly feel about his chances and his continued status as a top fighter after a loss like this?
Oh, you know who else he could fight?
Who's that?
Dominic Cruz.
They might do that.
Which would be, I mean, unless Jan is mentally destroyed, would be a viciously brutal fight to book in the other direction.
Yeah. You've got, I mean, I guess there's the Sandhagen rematch as well as a possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all fascinating fights, but I do find myself uncharacteristically concerned for Petr Yan. The mean little bastard.
I mean, I don't really like him as a person, but as a talent, I would be, it's like that bit at the end of The Princess Bride, he's like a stained glass window. You don't want to see that disintegrate.
Right.
He's a remarkable fighter to watch, and you don't want to see him I want to see it end like this.
By the bit at the end of The Princess Bride, do you mean the part where Wesley says there's a shortage of perfect breasts in the world?
No, the part where he's fighting. The part where he's fighting. What's his face?
There's a shortage of Piotr Jans in the world. It would be a shame to waste yours.
To destroy that one, yes. As Piotr puts the knife to his boob. No, it's when he's fighting. What's his face? Inigo. And he disarms him, and then Inigo's like, "Yeah, kill me." He's like, "I'd sooner destroy a stained glass window." You pervert!
You said at the end. That's like in the first act.
It's the end of the fight.
Okay.
It's not the end of The Princess Bride.
All right. Okay. All right. Yeah, because that's like in the beginning of the movie. All right.
There had been 5 perfect kisses in the world. The one between Piotr Jan and... blow them all away.
Okay. Well, that'll do it. I think it's a fitting end for this episode. I'm not sure why, but it feels appropriate. Yeah, we're just sandwiched between all these incredible fights, and that was such a shocking result. A good place to end. Again, make sure you head over to patreon.com/heavyhands, or just, use Google or whatever. We are going to be discussing more of both the UFC 286 and Jan versus Dvalishvili undercards. There's a lot to discuss on last weekend's undercard. I mean, we had a heavyweight prospect continuing to flame out. We had the postponed main event of Krylov versus Spann, which I said when it was rescheduled was so much better as just a mid-card fight, and it delivered like the dumb mid-card fight it was born to be. Jonathan Martinez, Said Nurmagomedov. We had the stupidest light heavyweight debutante fight I've ever seen. Rafael Assunção was unfairly murdered by Davey Grant. I mean, there's a lot to talk about on this undercard. So make sure you head over to our Patreon to hear that. Otherwise, find us on Twitter at EvilGregJackson, at BoxingBush, and we will talk to you next week when we will be recapping UFC 286 and looking forward to a Fight Night card main evented by Chito Vera and Corey Sandhagen. Very exciting. At last, bantamweight main events, and almost fortunately, that undercard is not quite as stacked as these two are. So I think we'll be able to squeeze it in a little better. Anyway, until then, thank you all so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. And until next time, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.